Picture a woman sitting in her car in a parking lot. She's been there for 11 minutes. Her phone is in her hand. There's a message on the screen. And she's just staring at it. Not because she doesn't know what it says, she knows exactly what it says. She's staring because for the first time in her entire adult life, she has absolutely no desire to respond to it. And that feeling terrifies her. Not because the message is threatening, not because the person who sent it is dangerous, but because the woman sitting in that car knows something about herself that she has never had to face before. She doesn't care anymore, and she has no idea who she is without the caring. If you've ever sat in that silence, if you've ever felt that specific kind of terrifying stillness where the part of you that always runs toward other people's pain just stops, then this is for you. Because what happens next, what happens after that moment in the parking lot, is not what most people think. It's not coldness, it's not damage, it's not a breakdown. It is the most precise and powerful psychological transformation a person can go through. And once you understand what it actually is, you will never see it the same way again. The first thing you need to understand is what an empath actually is beneath the label. Because that word gets used in a lot of ways that aren't entirely accurate. It gets used to describe people who are sensitive, people who feel a lot, people who cry at commercials or take on the mood of every room they enter. And while all of that might be true, it misses the deeper behavioral pattern. An empath doesn't just feel more. An empath organizes her entire sense of self around her ability to respond to what other people feel. That's the distinction that matters. It's not just sensitivity, it's identity. Her worth is tied to her usefulness. Her sense of belonging is tied to her availability. And her sense of love, genuine love, gets fused with the act of rescuing, soothing, carrying, and sustaining. That's not a personality type. That's a psychological framework built over years, often starting in childhood, in homes where love was conditional, where things were unpredictable, where staying attuned to someone else's emotions was how you stayed safe. Most empaths don't know that's where it came from. They just know that being there for people feels right, that tuning into what others need feels natural, that putting themselves second feels almost automatic. And for a long time it works. People appreciate her. They gravitate toward her. She becomes the person everyone calls, the one who listens, the one who never judges, the one who always has time, always has patience, always has something generous to offer. And that feels like love. It feels like connection. Until one day it doesn't. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from too much work or too little sleep. It's an exhaustion that lives in the chest. It's the feeling of having given everything you have and looking around and realizing that the room is empty. That the people who drained you aren't there. That the love you gave didn't create what you thought it would. It created dependency. It created expectation. It created a version of you that was never allowed to be tired, never allowed to need anything, never allowed to ask without first giving 3 times over. And somewhere in that exhaustion, something incredibly important begins to happen. The empath starts to watch. She starts paying attention not just to what people say, but to what they consistently do. She starts noticing the gap between someone's words and their actions. She starts seeing patterns she was always too generous to acknowledge before. The friend who only calls when there's a crisis. The partner who softens just enough to pull her back in every time she considers pulling away. The family member who receives her patience endlessly, but offers none in return. She sees it. For the first time, she really sees it. And that seeing is the beginning of everything. Here's where the psychology gets fascinating and where most people get it completely wrong. They assume that when an empath starts to pull back, it's a trauma response, that she's shutting down, that she's become guarded or broken or checked out. But behavioral science tells a different story. What's actually happening is something called a shift in internal locus of control. For most of her life, her emotional compass pointed outward. Other people's feelings determined her state. Their approval determined her worth. Their needs determined her schedule. That's an external locus of control. And when that system runs for long enough without reciprocity, the nervous system starts recalibrating. Not toward coldness, toward accuracy. She stops feeling responsible for the discomfort that other people refuse to take responsibility for themselves. She stops interpreting their emotional chaos as a call to action directed at her. She starts differentiating between what she can genuinely influence and what she's been performing the illusion of influencing for years. That distinction is devastating in the best possible way. Because once you see that you've been spending enormous energy trying to repair things that aren't yours to repair, the next question becomes unavoidable. What would I actually do with that energy if I kept it? And that question changes the architecture of everything. Now I want to talk about the guilt, because if you skip this part, nothing else lands properly. Because the shift we're describing doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like failure. It feels like something is wrong with you. The inner voice that has spent decades defining you by your capacity to love and give and hold space. That voice doesn't go quietly. It says things like, you're being selfish. It says, you're abandoning people who need you. It says, who are you if you're not the one who stays? And for a highly empathic person, those thoughts don't feel like distortions. They feel like moral obligations. They feel like truth. And sitting with that guilt, choosing yourself anyway, continuing to protect your own energy, even while that inner voice is screaming that you are betraying everyone who loves you, that is one of the hardest psychological experiences a human being can go through. But here's what the guilt is actually made of. It's made of old programming. It's made of a time when being attuned to others' needs wasn't a choice, it was a strategy for survival. It's made of the belief, installed early and reinforced often, that your value is transactional, that you must earn your place in people's lives by continuously producing emotional output. That love is not a given. It's a performance with an audience that needs to remain satisfied. And when you understand that, the guilt doesn't disappear overnight, but it stops being a verdict. It becomes information. It tells you where the healing still needs to go. The empath who begins to stop caring indiscriminately goes through what psychologists describe as a period of ego reorganization. The old identity, the nurturer, the fixer, the perpetually available one, begins to dissolve. And before the new identity fully forms, there's a gap. A strange, uncomfortable in-between space where she doesn't fully recognize herself. She might feel detached. She might feel like she's watching her own life from a slight distance. She might even feel grief. And that grief is legitimate because something is ending. A version of herself that she lived inside for years is receding. And even though that version was exhausting and unsustainable, it was familiar. And the brain does not distinguish between familiar and good. It just knows familiar equals safe. So letting go of even a painful identity creates the same neurological alarm as losing something precious. What comes next is worth everything that uncomfortable transition costs. When the recalibration begins, the first and most noticeable change is in how she communicates. Or more precisely, in what she stops communicating. See, the empath has always been an over-explainer. Not because she lacks confidence, because she believes deeply in mutual understanding. She believes that if she can just articulate it clearly enough, precisely enough, patiently enough, the other person will finally see her. Will finally get it. Will finally match the level of care she brings. So she tries. She explains her feelings with the thoroughness of a researcher. She offers context and nuance and compassion for the very person she's explaining herself to. She bends herself into intricate shapes to make the picture clear. And then one day, mid-sentence, she has a realization so simple and so devastating that she almost laughs. Some people will never see her. Not because they can't, because they've decided not to. Because seeing her clearly would require them to be accountable for how they've treated what they've seen. And accountability is something they're not available for. So they stay strategically blind. They misunderstand on purpose. They deflect with precision. They turn her clarity into something to argue about rather than something to honor. And she's been handing them that ammunition every single time she opened her mouth to explain. So she stops. And the silence that follows is not passive. It is one of the most deliberate and powerful things she has ever done. Because for someone whose primary relational strategy has been communication, choosing silence is an act of profound self-discipline. It means trusting herself without external confirmation. It means being secure in her perception without needing another person to agree with it. It means accepting that some relationships are not built for honesty, and that her job is not to renovate them. The silence also does something unexpected. It creates clarity about other people. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you see very quickly who was listening because they valued you, and who was listening because they were looking for information to use. The ones who genuinely care find ways to understand without the manual. The ones who were performing care reveal themselves almost immediately in the absence of her effort. That revelation is painful sometimes, but it's honest. And she needs honest more than she needs comfortable at this point in her life. Let's talk about what detachment actually feels like from the inside, because this is where the misconceptions are thickest. People use the word detachment and they picture a woman who has built walls, who has gone numb, who has cauterized her emotions because the feeling became too much. That's not detachment, that's dissociation. Those are completely different things, and the difference matters. True detachment, the psychological kind that comes from self-awareness and not from damage, feels like watching a storm through a window instead of standing in the middle of it. She still sees the storm. She still understands what it is. She can still feel its energy. But she's no longer drenched. She's no longer being pulled by the wind. She's no longer disoriented by the sound. She is present to the reality of what's happening without being consumed by it. And that shift in position, from inside the storm to observing it, doesn't reduce her emotional intelligence. It amplifies it. Because you cannot accurately assess something that is pulling you under. You need distance to see clearly. And for the first time, she has that distance. This is where her perception becomes extraordinary. Because she's not filtering experience through the desperate need to make everything okay. She's not rushing to resolve discomfort before she's actually understood it. She's not filling in the gaps in someone's behavior with generous interpretations that protect them at the cost of her own accuracy. She sees what's actually there. And what's actually there is often much simpler than she used to make it. People show you who they are with tremendous consistency. The complicated part was never them. The complicated part was her unwillingness to accept what they were showing her. Detachment removes that complication. It lets her take people at face value, not cynically, not coldly, but honestly. If someone has shown her 15 times that they prioritize her feelings only when it's convenient for them, detachment allows her to accept that as data, rather than as a failure on her part. She stops trying to explain away the pattern. She stops waiting for an anomaly that rewrites the whole story. She simply adjusts how much of herself she makes available to that person based on what they've demonstrated, not what she hopes. That is not hardness, that is wisdom. And wisdom looks like distance to people who benefited from your confusion. There's something I need you to understand about what happens in other people when the empath shifts, because this is the part that tends to cause her the most confusion and the most second-guessing. When she starts pulling back, when the explanation stops and the presence diminishes and the emotional availability becomes selective, the people around her do not quietly accept it. They push back. And they push back hard, but not always loudly. Sometimes the pushback is subtle. A guilt trip carefully worded as concern. A passive comment designed to remind her of who she used to be. A sudden escalation of their own crisis right at the moment she begins to create distance. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. It's called reactive pressure, and it happens because her withdrawal threatens the existing dynamic. She was a resource, a reliable, renewable, endlessly patient resource, and no one voluntarily gives up a resource without trying to recover it first. So they try. They soften. They show glimpses of the change she always hoped for. They become temporarily more considerate, more attentive, more present. And for someone who has wanted that for so long, who has waited for it, who has almost broken herself trying to produce it through her own generosity, that glimpse feels like proof that she was right to stay, that if she had just been more patient, it would have always become this. But here's what the behavioral research actually shows. That temporary shift is not transformation. It's stabilization behavior. It's a pattern of just enough change to restore the dynamic without actually changing the dynamic. And the empath, if she's done her work, can now see the difference. She can feel the difference between someone genuinely growing and someone performing growth to preserve access to her. And that discernment, the ability to tell those two things apart, is one of the most valuable psychological developments she will ever have. Because it protects her without requiring her to become closed or cynical. She doesn't have to assume everyone is performing, she just has to keep watching. Consistently, patiently, over time. And when the behavior returns to baseline, as stabilization behavior always does, she notes it. She adjusts. She doesn't create a scene or demand acknowledgement. She simply updates her internal map of that person and acts accordingly. That calm, observation-based recalibration is fundamentally different from the reactivity she used to operate from. Before, she would have been devastated when the effort faded. She would have blamed herself, tried harder, given more. This time, she feels something closer to recognition. Something like, yes, this is consistent with everything I already know. And she moves forward. The final shift, the one that completes the transformation, is the one that happens in complete silence. No announcement, no final conversation, no formal withdrawal with an explanation attached. She simply stops showing up. Not everywhere, not for everyone, but in the specific places and with the specific people where showing up has meant slowly disappearing herself. She stops initiating. She stops maintaining. She stops performing the ritual maintenance of relationships that have never had anything near equal investment. And the absence she creates is unlike anything she could have communicated with words. Because presence, when it's been reliable, when it's been given freely and consistently for years, becomes part of the background architecture of someone's life. It stops being seen. It starts being assumed. Like electricity or gravity, it's only truly noticed when it's gone. And when she takes it away, quietly, deliberately, without fanfare, the people who took it for granted experience something they are not prepared for. Not just her absence, but the sudden visibility of what her presence was actually doing. All the weight she was carrying that they never had to acknowledge because she never set it down. All the gaps she was filling that are now simply gaps. All the grace she extended that is no longer being extended. That visibility is the most honest thing she has ever communicated. It says everything her explanations never could. It says, I was here, fully, genuinely, and you didn't notice until I wasn't. And now I need you to understand something. I'm not coming back to the same arrangement. If there's a future here, it looks different. It is built on something different, or it doesn't exist. She doesn't say those words. She doesn't have to. The absence says them with a precision that language has never managed to achieve. And here's what I want to leave you with, the thing that sits underneath everything we've talked about today. The transformation we've been describing is not about becoming less loving. It is about loving with accuracy. It is about understanding that love which flows without direction, without discernment, without any consideration of whether it's landing in soil where something can grow. That love is not virtuous. It's exhausting. It's self-erasing. And it serves no one well in the end, not even the people who receive it. The empath who reclaims her energy, who chooses silence over endless explanation, who develops the discernment to see people clearly, who allows herself to be absent from places where her presence was never truly honored, that woman is not less loving than she was before. She is more loving. Because what she offers now is real. It comes from a place that is replenished rather than depleted. It comes without the invisible debt of resentment that builds when giving becomes obligatory. It comes with presence, genuine, full presence, rather than the mechanical performance of someone who has forgotten how to receive. She is not cold. She is not damaged. She is not checked out or hardened or finished. She is finally, at a level so deep most people cannot even perceive it, she is free. And the people who deserve her, the ones who show up with honesty and consistency and real regard, they will feel the difference immediately. Because there is nothing in this world quite like being loved by someone who has learned to love themselves first. That love is clean. It's clear. It asks for what it needs. It holds a standard not out of pride, but out of self-knowledge. It walks away when walking away is the truest thing to do. And it stays fully and wholeheartedly when staying is earned. You'll know when you've reached this place, not because someone tells you, not because a feeling announces itself dramatically. You'll know because you'll sit in that parking lot and look at that message on your phone and feel that quiet, that terrifying, liberating quiet. And instead of running from it, you'll let it be. You'll trust it. And you'll understand that what you're feeling isn't the end of who you are. It's the beginning of who you were always supposed to become.